So it was that just a few years later, the military strategy compounding civilian collateral damage was succeeded by a further elaboration which targeted the civilian infrastructure itself for destruction. In the process, the devastation doctrine that had targeted individuals in the past was expanded to include buildings and compounds, even the urban neighborhood that would initially name the nascent doctrine. Indeed, Dahiya had been an Israeli target for decades. The predominantly Shia Muslim suburb, located in southern Beirut, is one of its most densely populated. Today, it is a largely residential and commercial area encompassing malls, retail stores, and busy souks. Before the Lebanese Civil War in 1975, it was a rural settlement under rapid urbanization with a mixed community of Christians and Shia Muslims. Many of the latter had come from southern Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley, where they had fought the French Mandate in the interwar period. Another wave of Shiites moved into the area in the early 1960s, in part to flee rural hardship in the south and in part to access the perceived benefits of urbanization. After Jordan's civil war in 1971, still another wave of refugees followed. So when the Lebanese civil war took off, some 45% of the country's Shiites were living in Greater Beirut. After just a year into the civil war, some 100,000 Shiites were displaced from eastern Beirut following several massacres. When Israel initiated its 1978 and particularly 1982 invasions into Lebanon, another 250,000 Lebanese were displaced, many of them Shia, and an estimated 80% of Lebanese villages were devastated. And in 1986, the South Lebanon Security Belt was established with Israeli logistics and military support, leading more Shiites to move to Beirut. By then, an estimated 800,000 Shias, that is, the overwhelming majority of Shia in Lebanon, had experienced displacement. So, when the Gaza war spread from the Strip to Lebanon, the IDF bombed southern Lebanon in general and Dahiya in particular, and demanded a security zone in the region. It was a déjà vu all over again for the Shiites. What made the Israeli operation of 2006 different from earlier devastations was their new military doctrine. Asymmetric warfare combined two heretofore forbidden characteristics of modern warfare: the deliberate destruction of the civilian infrastructure and the deployment of disproportionate force. The net effect was a dual war crime par excellence. Under international humanitarian law, warring parties are required to distinguish between combatants and civilians to ensure that attacks on legitimate military targets are proportional, and that the military advantage of such attacks outweighs the potential harm done to civilians. Since violations of such laws are considered war crimes, the 2006 Lebanon War sparked widespread condemnation by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the United Nations, which all charged both Hezbollah and Israel of violating international humanitarian law, though the equation of the two sides made little sense in terms of their respective firepower and capabilities. The pioneering obliteration doctrine was first outlined in 2005 by Gadi Eisenkot. Interestingly, he was no extremist. Subsequently, an influential Israeli military leader and politician, Eisenkot supported Israeli democracy and a two-state solution. But as a military strategist, he opened the Pandora's box that both Israel's right-wing Likud and Messianic far-right would embrace. Eisenkot was appointed head of the Northern Command following Magen Udi Adam's resignation amid criticism over his conduct in the 2006 Lebanon War. Adam had led Israeli forces against Hezbollah until he was effectively sidelined when another general was appointed above him. At the time, it was seen as still another fallout of the Lebanese crisis. Many Israelis were frustrated that the military had failed to secure a comprehensive victory over the Hezbollah militia or retrieve the two soldiers whose capture had triggered the conflict. It was this popular frustration that set the stage for tougher measures. Eisenkot's strategy was based on the idea that the IDF would have to severely damage Dahiya to create effective deterrence against Hezbollah. After all, his predecessor had been compelled to quit for having been too cautious. The assumption was that the deployment of disproportionate power would end Hezbollah for good, or at least for a sustained period. Hence, Eisenkot's new strategy of disproportion. With an outbreak of hostilities with Hezbollah, The IDF will need to act immediately, decisively, and with force that is disproportionate to the enemy's actions and the threat it poses. Such a response aims at inflicting damage and meting out punishment to an extent that will demand long and expensive reconstruction processes. The strike must be carried out as quickly as possible and must prioritize damaging assets over seeking out each and every launcher. Punishment must be aimed at decision makers and the power elite. Israel's test will be the intensity and quality of its response to incidents on the Lebanese border or terrorist attacks involving Hezbollah in the north or Hamas in the south. In such cases, Israel again will not be able to limit its response to actions whose severity is seemingly proportionate to an isolated incident. Rather, it will have to respond disproportionately in order to make it abundantly clear that the State of Israel will accept no attempt to disrupt the calm currently prevailing along its borders. Israel must be prepared for deterioration and escalation, as well as for a full-scale confrontation. Such preparedness is obligatory in order to prevent long-term attrition. In 2006, Dahiya served as Hezbollah's stronghold. In the war of that year, following the group's rockets on Israeli border towns, Israel's military focused on major civilian targets in Lebanon, including infrastructure and public works, ports and factories, power systems, civilian homes and industrial plants, even ambulances. UN emergency relief authorities called Israel's offensive disproportionate, referring to the horrific leveling of block after block of buildings in Beirut. They regarded it as a violation of international humanitarian law. A third of the killed were children, while 900,000 Lebanese were displaced. Figure 7.4. When the IDF embraced the nascent obliteration doctrine, the Cold War was history. Ad hoc tribunals had been set up. The Genocide Convention was in the ICC's Rome Statute. UN organs had many references to it, and the UN even had its special advisor with a mandate for warning the UN on the prevention of genocide. Ostensibly, things were in place to deal with this kind of military doctrine that explicitly targeted civilians and civilian infrastructure. Yet, when Eisenkot stated in public that Israel would embrace a new military doctrine, that of extreme disproportion which virtually ensured genocidal atrocities, there was no consequential international outcry, not to speak of intervention. Despite the IDF's track record since the 1980s, the demise of the peace process, the rise of Jewish supremacy doctrines and messianic far right in Israel, and the Israel-US-EU blockade of Gaza after Hamas rose to power following a democratic election, which made a new war a matter of time rather than a matter of principle. The doctrine of obliteration. In the obliteration doctrine, the army deliberately targets civilian infrastructure to wreak massive suffering on the civilian population, thereby seeking to establish an effective deterrence. Following the 2006 Gaza War, the same doctrine was deployed in the 2008-2009 Gaza War, or Operation Cast Lead, as Israel called it. This was a 3-week armed conflict between the Gazan Palestinian groups and the IDF. It caused 1,200 to 400 Palestinian and a dozen Israeli deaths. Over 46,000 homes were destroyed, making more than 100,000 people homeless. As Eisenkot saw it, what happened in the Dahiya quarter of Beirut in 2006 will happen in every village from which shots will be fired in the direction of Israel. We will wield disproportionate power and cause immense damage and destruction. From our perspective, these are military bases. This isn't a suggestion. It's a plan that has already been authorized. Every one of the Shiite villages is a military site, with headquarters, an intelligence center, and a communications center. Dozens of rockets are buried in houses, basements, attics, and the village is run by Hamas men. In each village, according to its size, there are dozens of active members, the local residents, and alongside them, fighters from outside, and everything is prepared and planned, both for a defensive battle and for firing missiles at Israel. After pilot efforts, the obliteration doctrine was effectively in place. It had been developed by Israel's military leaders in close cooperation with the country's cabinet and political leaders. It targeted the civilian infrastructure for devastation, deliberately and purposefully. Civilian devastation was no longer unfortunate collateral damage, but the very focus of a new military doctrine, supported by Israel's political and military elites that understood well the inevitable consequence of civilian decimation. As Colette Gabriel Siboni, Eisenkott's frequent co-author, noted 15 years before the post-October 7 Gaza atrocities. This approach is applicable to the Gaza Strip as well. There, the IDF will be required to strike hard at Hamas and to refrain from the cat-and-mouse games of searching for Qassam rocket launchers. The IDF should not be expected to stop the rocket and missile fire against the Israeli home front through attacks on the launchers themselves, but by means of imposing a ceasefire on the enemy. A central element in the obliteration doctrine relates to the hoped-for purpose of ending the conflict in the shortest possible time. Furthermore, Eisenkot pledged that, in the next clash with Hamas, we won't bother to hunt for tens of thousands of rocket launchers, and we won't spill our soldiers' blood in attempts to overtake fortified Hamas positions. Rather, we shall destroy Gaza and won't be deterred by the protests of the world. The author of The Fall of Israel, 2025, Dr. Dan Steinbach is an internationally renowned visionary of the multipolar world and the founder of Difference Group. He has served at the India, China, and America Institute, USA, Shanghai Institutes for International Studies, China, and the EU Center, Singapore. For more, see htww.differencegroup.net. The original version was published by China-US Focus on June 19, 2025.